one of the most powerful industrial economies ever built, is quietly losing its factories. Not in a crisis, not in a collapse, not in any way that triggers alarm bells or emergency headlines. Quietly, deliberately, one rational corporate decision at a time. And the direction those factories are moving, that's the part that should stop you. Not China, not Southeast Asia, not the cheap labor destinations that define the last 40 years of globalization. America. That single directional fact breaks every assumption most people carry about how global industry moves. And if you haven't heard this explained clearly yet, that's not an accident. Most coverage is still processing the surface. We're going to go underneath it. Here is what this video covers: which German companies are moving and why the math gave them no real choice, what broke inside Germany's competitive model, and the specific moment it broke, how America converted someone else's structural crisis into the most aggressive industrial strategy it has run in 60 years, and one consequence of this shift that is already locked in, already irreversible, but not yet visible in any headline. That last piece is the one that reframes everything else. Stay with this. Germany's industrial model has one core premise: take expensive, highly skilled labor, combine it with engineering culture that treats precision as identity, not just process, add dense supplier networks built over generations, and produce goods so reliably excellent that the world pays a premium regardless of price. That model survived oil shocks. It survived reunification. It survived the 2008 financial crisis and the full rise of Chinese manufacturing competition. For 60 years, nothing broke it. It had one hidden dependency that almost nobody discussed publicly: cheap energy, specifically cheap Russian natural gas, delivered via pipeline directly into the heart of European industry, used as the bridge fuel between Germany's fossil past and its renewable future. For roughly 20 years, that gas kept industrial electricity prices at levels that made energy-intensive manufacturing globally viable. Chemicals, steel, aluminum, advanced materials. The math worked because the energy was affordable. This is not what most people understand about German industry, and this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. The gas was not a minor input. It was a load-bearing wall inside the entire competitive structure. Remove it, and suddenly the cost economics of an enormous slice of German heavy manufacturing are exposed in a way they had never been stress-tested. In 2022, that wall was removed, not gradually, not with transition time, overnight. The Nord Stream pipeline disruption following Russia's invasion of Ukraine didn't create a temporary energy problem. It revealed something that was always structurally true but had never been forced into the open. Germany's industrial competitiveness had been resting, at least partially, on a geopolitical assumption about the stability of a relationship that no longer existed. Industrial electricity prices spiked to levels that had previously appeared only in theoretical worst-case models. Some German industrial facilities stopped operating, not because demand disappeared, not because of any internal business failure, but because the cost of running the machines exceeded the value of what the machines produced. That is not a business problem. That is a physics problem. And here's the part that almost all of the subsequent coverage missed. The acute crisis ended, prices stabilized, headlines moved on. Politicians announced the worst was over, and most analysis filed Germany's energy situation under difficult but manageable, improving over time. But this is where the story flips. German industrial electricity prices today, 3 years after the initial shock, after significant policy response, after major renewable expansion, remain roughly 2 to 3 times higher than comparable costs in the United States. 3 years. Still double to triple. For most industries, a cost disadvantage of that scale is serious but survivable. You automate more aggressively. You compete on quality and precision, which German industry genuinely can do better than almost anyone. You absorb the hit and find efficiencies elsewhere. But this is not what most people understand about energy-intensive manufacturing. And this is the part that changes the entire frame. For chemicals, steel, aluminum, specialty materials, electricity is not overhead. It is not a utility cost that sits on the balance sheet alongside office supplies and IT infrastructure. It is a direct input. It enters the product at every stage of the production process. When your primary ingredient costs 3 times what your closest competitor pays for the exact same ingredient, you do not have a margin problem. You do not have a strategy problem. You have an existence problem. And rational companies facing existence problems do not wait for policy cycles to fix them. They act with the kind of permanence that capital commitments require. Which brings us to BASF. BASF is not a German company struggling. It is the largest chemical company on Earth. Founded in Germany 160 years ago, headquartered in Ludwigshafen, home to the largest integrated industrial site in Europe. It is, in many ways, the physical embodiment of the German industrial model. And it is building a major new production complex in Geismar, Louisiana. Not exploring, not studying feasibility, not in preliminary discussions with American authorities, building, foundations in the ground, supply chains forming around the new facility, engineering teams in the process of relocating to staff it. At the same time, and this is the part that deserves emphasis, BASF is pulling back investment from Ludwigshafen. The CEO has stated in plain language that required no interpretation that the European cost environment makes large-scale domestic investment increasingly difficult to justify. The largest chemical company in the world just issued a verdict on Germany's industrial competitiveness in public, on the record. Now here's where most people stop and think, okay, one company, one decision, probably complicated factors, not necessarily representative, but this is not what you think it is, because BASF is not alone. And the pattern across multiple companies, multiple sectors, multiple decision timelines makes the individual cases look like what they actually are. Not isolated corporate choices, but expressions of a consistent underlying logic. Volkswagen, 87 consecutive years of German operations without ever closing a domestic plant. 87 years. Until now, when the pressure on its German manufacturing footprint became severe enough that domestic plant closures entered serious internal discussion for the first time in the company's history. ThyssenKrupp restructuring its European steel operations while maintaining American industrial presence. Continental restructuring tens of thousands of European positions while preserving American operations. Across German chemicals, automotive supply chain, specialty manufacturing, and advanced materials, the directional signal is consistent, away from Germany toward the United States. And now the question that the company-level data demands, why America specifically? Why is this not just a story of German industry dispersing globally? This is where something important needs to be said clearly. Because the American side of this story is not passive. America did not simply become attractive by geographic accident. It became attractive through a deliberate policy architecture. This was assembled at exactly the moment German companies were looking for an alternative. 3 elements, understand all 3. First, energy economics. American industrial electricity prices have been substantially lower than European equivalents for years. This is driven by domestic natural gas abundance from the shale revolution. But it is not only the price level, it is the predictability. A chemical company committing capital to a facility with a 20-year operational horizon needs to model its energy costs. It needs to do so across that entire period with reasonable confidence. The United States can currently offer that confidence. Germany, structurally, cannot. Not while its energy transition is still mid-execution with an uncertain timeline to resolution. Second, and this is the piece that is genuinely underreported given its scale. The Inflation Reduction Act deployed $370 billion in structured incentives for clean energy manufacturing. It also supported advanced industrial production and domestic supply chain development. The CHIPS Act added substantial further support for semiconductor and advanced technology manufacturing. Together, these constitute the largest deliberate American industrial policy commitment since the post-war era. These are not traditional subsidies. They are structured to make the economics of building new industrial capacity in America materially superior. This includes jurisdictions with lower baseline costs. For a German manufacturer already absorbing a 3 times energy cost disadvantage at home, add American energy savings. Plus structured government incentives, plus access to the world's largest consumer market in a single, consistent legal jurisdiction. The investment case does not require creativity to construct. It constructs itself. Third, regulatory speed. This generates debate because it involves real trade-offs about environmental and labor standards. Standards that reasonable people weigh differently. But from a pure capital allocation perspective, the perspective that determines where factories actually get built. American permitting timelines for major industrial facilities are significantly faster than their German and broader European equivalents. The difference between a 2-year permitting process and a 5-year permitting process is not an administrative inconvenience. On a 15-year capital commitment, it changes the return calculation fundamentally. In some cases, it changes whether the investment is viable at all. Rehook. Stay with this, because what comes next is the layer that most analysis never reaches. These companies are not leaving Germany. That statement sounds like it contradicts everything laid out above. It doesn't. And the distinction it draws is the most important thing to understand about what this shift actually means over the long term. BASF is still a German company. Volkswagen is still a German company. The headquarters stay in Germany. The intellectual property stays. The financial structures, the senior leadership, the brand equity all remain. What is relocating is physical production, the actual process of making things. And for a while, 5 years, perhaps 10, that distinction makes the situation appear more manageable than it actually is. Corporate profits remain healthy. Headquarters tax revenues hold. Germany still reads, on most metrics, as an industrial powerhouse because it owns industrial powerhouses. even as those powerhouses increasingly manufacture somewhere else. The gap between what the data shows and what is structurally happening is real and growing. But this is where something breaks that the balance sheet cannot capture. Manufacturing is not just an economic activity, it is a living knowledge system. And knowledge systems do not hold their position when the context that sustains them moves away. The process engineer who spends 30 years on a production line develops judgment that cannot be written down. It cannot be transferred to a manual or preserved in a training program. It exists in practice. The supplier who builds components to exact tolerances across decades of proximity to a manufacturing problem develops institutional knowledge. The vocational culture, the industrial clusters, the daily creative problem solving that emerges when highly skilled people work together. This ecosystem does not exist in the abstract. It exists around the factories. When the factories move, one rational decision at a time, each individually correct, the ecosystem does not hold its place. It follows, slowly, in career choices and supplier relocations and R&D centers opening near the new production clusters, because that is where the manufacturing knowledge now actually lives. America experienced this process in reverse across the 1980s and 90s. Manufacturing moved offshore. Companies stayed American. Profits stayed strong. The financial sector expanded. For a decade, it read as an upgrade. Less making, more designing, financing, branding. Then the knowledge followed the factories. Then the innovation followed the knowledge. Then entire regions built around industrial production discovered that the expertise accumulated over generations had quietly relocated, leaving communities without the factories and without any coherent path to replacing what those factories had represented. America is still managing those consequences, politically, socially, in terms of regional economic devastation that is still unresolved decades later. The current American industrial policy push is, in substantial part, an attempt to reverse that erosion, to rebuild manufacturing ecosystem depth that was allowed to thin for too long. The extraordinary irony of this specific moment, and this is the part that deserves to be stated directly, is that the policy doing the most to rebuild American manufacturing ecosystem depth is simultaneously doing the most to accelerate German manufacturing ecosystem erosion. The incentives that made Louisiana attractive for BASF make Texas attractive for specialty chemical investment that might otherwise have remained in Europe. The energy economics that make American operations viable for Volkswagen's supply chain apply equally to dozens of German automotive suppliers. Suppliers evaluating where to locate their next generation of facilities. These are not separate stories unfolding in parallel. They are one story told from two national perspectives, and the mechanism connecting them, American industrial policy married to American energy abundance, is not going to slow down. If anything, it accelerates as early movers demonstrate returns, and the next wave of companies updates its investment calculus accordingly. Final rehook, because this is where the frame has to expand one more time. Germany is responding. The policy effort is genuine. Accelerated renewable build-out, industrial electricity price support mechanisms, regulatory streamlining commitments, strategic investment programs. The awareness inside German government and German industry of what is happening is real. Nobody with actual information is treating this as a temporary fluctuation. The problem is not awareness. It never is. The problem is the gap between the speed at which capital makes permanent decisions and the speed at which policy systems can realistically respond. The concrete being poured in Louisiana is not going to be unpoured when Germany reaches its next energy transition milestone. The supply chains forming around new American facilities are not going to reroute back to Europe when a German permitting reform takes effect. The engineering teams relocating to staff new American operations are building careers and lives in those locations. Careers and lives that are not going to reverse on a policy timeline. Germany has navigated structural challenges of comparable severity before, including one that involved rebuilding an entire economic system from rubble. The institutional capacity, the engineering culture, the policy sophistication, these are real assets, not rhetorical claims. But assets require activation, and the activation has to happen faster than the capital allocation decisions that are right now building the industrial geography of 2035. That race has no guaranteed outcome. But the competitor Germany is running against is not standing still. It is running the most deliberate and well-resourced industrial recruitment strategy in 60 years, and it is winning. The people who watch this channel are not looking for someone to tell them what happened yesterday. They are looking to understand what is structurally happening, the forces underneath the surface that determine outcomes. Outcomes before those outcomes become obvious to everyone else. This is that kind of analysis, the kind that rarely gets made this clearly, this early, about shifts this consequential. If that is how you think about the world, if you want to understand the real mechanics of how global systems shift, before the mainstream catches up, subscribe. Because the next development in this story is already in motion. The mechanism is already running, And when it becomes impossible to ignore, you will want to have understood it from the beginning.